Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Cape. I'm data superhero Keith Belanger. I'm joined today by fellow data superhero Serge Gershkovich. Welcome, Serge. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Keith, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Oh, and on top of that, fellow colleague at SQL DBM as well. So, both superheroes and colleagues. So it's a pleasure to have you on. And today's topic, data modeling with Snowflake. I think two kind of subjects merged together that we both have an affinity for, data modeling as well as Snowflake, obviously with being superheroes. And you went and actually wrote a book on the topic, data modeling for Snowflake. So I think we'd like to dive into that a little bit. What really influenced you to kind of write a book on this specific topic?
Great question. It really came from interacting with the data community. I was getting questions from folks that were interested in SQL DBM and getting their company on board with data modeling, and maybe they themselves had seen some comments from LinkedIn or some talk amongst forums of it's important, it makes your life easier, but they didn't necessarily have a background to know exactly where to jump in. Also speaking and traveling at conferences, and people would just ask, like after a talk or after a panel, to say, hey, this sounds really, really beneficial. Where can I find out more? Is there a good resource that you can recommend? And unfortunately, once I started kind of going through that mental checklist, I realized it was more of like a curriculum of like a course load of books.
Yeah.
And I realized that that's not what people are looking for. And
Right.
I thought, when I was starting out, both in Snowflake as a new platform, as a data architect, or back when just in data architecture in general and in BI, I was never really exposed to the fundamentals of data modeling. And this is, having studied computer science. So I think like most people, you take the complementary CS 201 or 210, I think it was, that was
Yep.
Introduction to Databases. So just by the end of the class, you've wrapped your head around SQL. You don't necessarily get the full grasp of conceptual, logical, physical constraints, etc. Business use cases, tying it to the value and usability within the organization. That's a lot of things, but at the same time, the key thing there is make it pragmatic and make it practical. So a lot of the literature on data modeling is very narrow. So a lot of it is very academic. There's very few practical examples of, you can open almost any data modeling textbook and get an idea for, let's say, a type 2 dimension and what that looks like. But just saying that it has a valid from date and a valid to date and a new row is inserted and off you go, I'm sorry, but you're not done. So there's a whole lot of complexity downwind of that you really need to get a firm grasp on if you're going to be building these things instead of just talking about them. So I wanted to see, if it didn't exist, build it. So I wanted to see what I could do to help alleviate that. And I just tried to write the book that I wish I had when I was learning all of these things.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from this real famous movie, Robots, which is an anime. It says, "Find a need, fill a need," right? So, that's exactly. And to your point, from an academic perspective, and I can remember going through computer science as well. And when I was going through that, it wasn't because I thought I was going to be in data, but going back, there really is a gap in the academic aspect of, you write SQL or Python now and so forth, but, understanding the true, modeling aspects of it, like you said, the conceptual, the logical, the physical, and all the things that come around it. And from my perspective, one of the things I enjoyed about your book, and even having been doing this for a long time, is that you did bring those aspects of modeling that, let's just say, it's not just even for Snowflake, right? This is just with modeling, but in combining it with Snowflake and bringing the two together, to your point, in one book, like I think like many of us, I have a, bookshelf full of books, and I have to grab this piece from the Kimball book, or this piece from the Data Vault book, or this piece from, another modeling book to try to put everything together. So it was nice that you brought the modern platform of Snowflake and the true, time tested aspects of data modeling together in one location.
Very kind of you to say so, because that's really not the sentiment I got when I proposed the idea. Everyone said I was crazy. Why are you making data modeling platform specific? That's antithetical to the whole concept.
Right.
But it's really having the courage of your own convictions. And sure, just because it has Snowflake in the title means it may not be applicable, or some parts of it may not be applicable to other database types and cloud data platforms. But I think at minimum 80-90% is. And there's really no other way to communicate some of the intricacies of, especially for the Snowflake architecture and the unique approach that they've engineered in working with data and taking advantage of the features like zero copy cloning. Right. That, inefficiency in legacy on-premise systems in the old days meant time, just meant you waited longer. Whereas inefficiency in the cloud and in SaaS, it means you pay more. So there really is that incentive of you need to get it right. If you have to go back and redo, it's going to cost more. If you have to wait, it's going to cost more. So understand first what you're working with, understand the materials if you're going to be building something, and to know their strengths and weaknesses, and then architect accordingly. You can't just say, I want a house before you understand, are you building out of brick or wood? They look very different.
Right. Yeah, you have to have that plan. And a lot of, I've seen data engineers where you want to jump right to let's just start building. But, what is that plan? What is that strategy in terms of it? And then, how do I leverage then the physical aspects of the platform, in this case, Snowflake, to your point, to sit there and say to accentuate, I guess you could say, aspects of your design to get that uplift, and whether that be performance, or be how you use storage and meeting that business requirement, right, that you're looking for.
Yeah. And the argument in those cases that you're describing is always cloud data platforms are quick, and they make it quick to pivot and change and fix, which is certainly true. What they're forgetting.
It is true. And I think I also,
yeah.
But even when I go back to when I started doing data architecture, right, you did this whole monolithic design, right? And then you did this, and then you did that. Now, to me, you're able to chop that up into, I'm going to call it micro designs, right? You can sit there and say, we're doing a sprint, or we're doing something like that. And you design this and hand it off. And to your point, you could possibly fail fast, pivot on your design, change. So I think you're just having to take these concepts and do them more iteratively than you used to. Like, God, I can remember the first projects I did on, like, you spend 3 months designing your star schemas and stuff like that, and then it went to your ETL team. So yeah, it's just kind of the new technologies and new methods, allow you to just do it a bit differently, but the concepts are still
yeah. And it's also exactly where you apply those concepts, because when you say fail fast, iterate, I think it's much more applicable to the analytical type of queries and data structures, things that are more driving analyses to solve business questions, and not to the underlying structure of the data, the architecture of the underlying data, because that's really what's going to dictate exactly what you can do with the data that you've loaded, and what types of analyses will be cost efficient, and which ones are going to require you to use window functions and lookups and pivots and things like this. So if you really think through ahead of time, you're going to avoid some of those most expensive types of operations and just utilize what a columnar database is built for, which is aggregations and joins.
Exactly. I can look back, and when I was doing back to the type 2 dimension, right, you'd go and expire that. You go do an update on that row, right, and expire that row. But now if you look at Snowflake, for example, that's an expensive thing to do versus just sit there and say, oh, I just put the next row with a new start date, and then use, like I said, use windowing and group by and other aspects of the capabilities of the platform. to get the most efficiency. So the logical concept of a type 2 dimension stays the same, but how you're physically doing it is going to be dependent on that platform.
Yeah.
So, you talk about writing the book and you were kind of saying, sounds like you had kind of like some mixed feedback when you were going to write the book. But what has been response since writing the book from people out there who have purchased it or received it?
Yeah, that's honestly the scariest part in writing the book is really that part you don't anticipate when you start out, which is the setting it free at the very end. You think it's going to be a lot of work. You think you're going to need to cram, to do all sorts of research and analysis, and all of that is true. But you're very much on a deadline. You're very much kind of in assembly line mode of, I got to get this done. But when the smoke clears and you've got a finished product in your hand, then you realize this is it. Once I hit send, this version of me and my work will be out there in the world forever. And
right.
It's not, it's not private. You're not doing it for one client. You can't take it back and redo it. This is it. So luckily, and the funny thing is, the day I hit publish, I couldn't have even made a bet as to what the feedback would be like. I was really curious to see, especially from people who don't know me, aren't going to be inclined to say, yeah, Serge is my buddy, did great.
Right.
Just, it's out there for everyone to read. And I couldn't have told you if people would love it or hate it. I just knew that I gave it my best. I accomplished what I set out to do. It was Kurt Vonnegut who said that, write for a specific audience. So not doing that is like trying to open a window and make love to the world. Not very effective. So I had exactly the structure, the format, everything that I wanted to communicate. And luckily it paid off. So the feedback has been, I would say, universally positive.
Yeah. People
really appreciate, because again, the reason that initial response was a bit guarded was it's different. There's, like I said, there's no other book like it. I took a chance and I just wanted to try my own thing.
Yeah.
And it looks like that resonated. People appreciate the fact that it's very much kind of a ramp up in terms of complexity. You don't need to go all the way through to the end if you're just kind of aiming for theory, aiming to familiarize yourself a little bit with the Snowflake platform through practical examples. And overall, it's, what do I want to say here? It's the book that when you pick it up, like I was saying earlier, you don't want to send like a course load of work to someone who just wants to understand data modeling. So what I really tried to push to the forefront with the reader experience is why learn this in the first place. Every chapter is more about, this isn't just like, here's logical modeling, but it starts with, why would you use logical modeling in the first place? And if that rings a bell, and if that gets you excited or piques your interest, then you're going to be much more inclined to follow through and say, okay, now let me learn about the intricacies. Otherwise, you get all the subject matter up front normally, and by the time you get to the end, you're like, well, this is too complex. I don't even know why I'm learning this.
Right.
And at least that's been my experience in a lot of technical manuals.
And even for myself, when I got the book and I went through it, and I would say, much like probably many other seasoned people out there, you kind of go through and you say, okay, what did Serge have to say on this? And what was his perspective here? And I would say I personally learned a lot in your book, because I've been for a long time been in, I don't want to say like in a tunnel vision, or as you get to an architect, you tend to get your ways, you tend to get your patterns, in your scenarios. And you brought a different perspective to, conceptual modeling and other things that I'm like, hey, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And, and I can adopt that and grow mine. So even though I think you went in attack things address things from maybe somebody who doesn't, understand what conceptual modeling is, or even what normalization, that was one area that I really got into, because how much you normalize or denormalize, and you really, I think you went to like 6 normal form or 7 normal form or something like that, and it got my own wheels turning, in which I appreciate to, is to sit there and say, I like to grow my knowledge. So even somebody like myself who's been doing this almost 30 years, I learned a lot from your book, because you didn't just copy paste what's been said for years, right? It's like, this is your perspective. Like you said, you put it out there, and I enjoyed it from that perspective myself.
Yeah. And in all fairness, I did leave a disclaimer after third normal form saying you couldn't stop reading here. But if you're ready to continue the journey, wrap in.
I'm picturing myself modeling in 6th, 7th normal form, and I was kind of like laughing to myself, but I appreciated it, that's for sure. I think and kind of like, go ahead.
Full disclosure, by the way, that you didn't just read the book early. You were one of the technical reviewers, so you really got to see and contribute to the overall product and the quality. So
yeah,
and you actually worked quite a few things, especially when it came to data vault.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I was very humbled by you asking me, but I like interacting with peers and learning others. We all have different perspectives and viewpoints, and you could be stubborn, or you can appreciate and absorb what others are doing. That's kind of the approach I take, is always learning. And I think I've said this to you in the past. If I go a day and I don't learn anything new, it wasn't a good day, right? And so that's what I try to do. So what would you say, you were kind of saying at the beginning when you had people asking you, and I know I've run into this, where you've got that seasoned, data engineer, analyst, never really experienced the true modeling. What do you say to them, when they're talking about this? And today you hear a lot, data modeling isn't even relevant anymore. How do you approach that type of question when people come at you?
Sure. I would probably start by first condensing and then unpacking. So condensing, modeling in one word, is simplification. So a data model, we're not talking about the strict data modeling process from beginning to end. Let's just take a data model for what it is. It's a simplification of your business model and its physical representation in the database. And having, again, now we start overloading the word with semantics, with diagrams, notations, processes, etc. But at its core, we're still talking about a simplification of something. So humans are visual creatures. We understand things much simpler when you show us, instead of having to try to imagine it in our heads. And having a diagram with a list of tables, lines that represent relationships, is just an instant aha compared to when you log into a database, any database, and you just see a list of tables. You have tables drop down, views drop down, go off and try to make sense of that and understand, how is one related to another? How do you join them? How do you get one set of attributes into another set of attributes? And from there, like I said, that's the part where the book starts to kind of ramp up and say, okay, where do you want to go? This is modeling in a nutshell. And what type of, if what you're doing is kind of modern type of analytics engineering, DBT style, let's just build and iterate. I'm not going to try to convince you to say, don't write a line of SQL before you've designed your structure, but you utilize a model to visualize what you've already built, to inform the joins and operations that you're about to code through SQL. Absolutely. And how much time is it going to save you? Instead of having to ask a colleague, organize a meeting, pull in other people into that, waste other people's time, because these are the hidden sappers of productivity. So nobody puts a quota on. Well, actually, some companies do. They put a quota. They charge you per meeting, per email. That's a bit extreme, but it's the unseen cost of inefficiency. And we can put query credit monitors on Snowflake and monitor what we're doing. We can iterate and analyze, but how much time we spend versus how much we could have spent if we had a reference, an accessible, up-to-date reference to guide us, that's really, unfortunately, a lot of times just goes unnoticed. And it's that frog in boiling water effect, that you ask someone once, then you ask them again, then it becomes the norm, and you say, well, I don't need a data model.
Right.
and you're wasting half your day running around the
Yeah,
office.
I got Joe at the other end of the office over there. He's got everything.
That's my data model.
Yeah. Well, I can remember, I learned my journey into data started with modeling before I even learned how to write SQL. But I found that when I was doing data engineering, many years ago, that I printed out I had the model, and I had that by my side because, to your point, to accelerate, well, how do these tables join, right? Sometimes the primary key of one table and what you're joining to another table is not the same name, right? And understanding that. So have you gotten that? So you had those types of the data engineers. How do I use this? And as some of them maybe purchased a book or used it, did you get any type of feedback of that aha moment? Have you got some people that said, "Oh my God, I'm glad I see this now and I'm able to understand it"?
Sure. It was exactly the feedback that I was looking for, of people I don't know reaching out to me and saying, for the first time, I've gotten a clear and concise explanation of what this is and why I should use it. And I'm going to start implementing it in my day-to-day. So that right there for me is the validation I needed. Warms my heart, and it's all the thank you I expected to get out of writing this. There haven't been any gaps or any type of errors or critical things that I got wrong, again, because I had tremendous help from people of your stature. And that's why, again, I feel like my mission is accomplished. I don't care how many copies the book sells. It's just that everyone that picks it up is content, and it's more than content. It's actually, what's the word? Is not just paying lip service to the formal product. Is actually saying, this was useful, and I'm gonna take this knowledge and do good things with it.
Yeah. A question, like a personal question towards you. And I know when I do things like I'll write like blogs or I'll do things, oftentimes I'm doing them because it's a great way for me to learn, teach myself, right? Did you find that same thing when you were writing the book, that you learned far more than you I don't know the right word, doing the journey than you did
Absolutely.
Going into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had that experience with a blog or an article where you realize, there's a couple of things you need to brush up on, or some research that you need to do ahead of time. But in this case, there was certainly, every chapter was like that. And it really gave me that, it's obvious now in hindsight, but having gone through the process myself, when you read a technical book or some form of academic literature, and you realize, you think like, wow, this author really knows a lot about topic X. Oh, actually, they just did a lot of front loading. They wrote each chapter, and they're just regurgitating it while the information is fresh. But at the same time, because you're immersed in this for a considerable period of time, half a year or more, and you're cogitating at each moment on insights that you've had in previous chapters, especially in this book, since it does follow this kind of ramping up, not even a ramp, but almost like a helical structure of it. Just reinforces concepts and then goes deeper and makes them more technical, builds on them. Then you start to see the big picture of, oh, this is why I was setting the groundwork in the early stages, because it makes I don't no longer have to make decisions, or these types of decisions later on. They're already established, and it makes everything I do downstream easier. And the blueprint is now the map, because I've built it according to spec, and I can now use this, instead of to build, to navigate, to share with my organization and have them find their way around through what I've built. So tying that back to business value, I think that was my biggest takeaway. And just because I was forced to think through it, and it's not a perspective that I often saw in technical discussions around data modeling, because they usually tend to center around semantics, one notation versus another notation. What's the right way to single letter aliases, or should you be more plural or singular, things like that. And why isn't anybody talking about getting the business involved in validating the actual plan to begin with? Why isn't anybody talking about the notation that's going to be simplest for your non-technical colleagues to also follow along with?
Right.
And that's kind of what I took away and tried to really lay out and as the foremost part of data modeling, that it needs to be a team sport, and for that it needs to be inclusive. So sure, there are very technical parts at the very tail end, but it doesn't mean that the whole build up to the final physicalization or the transformational logic that goes into it, all of that should be understandable to just about anyone in the organization.
Yeah, I often remind over the years when I was working always in IT and with a lot of technical people, my role was between business and IT. And I always reminded people, we got to remember, everything we're doing in data is for the business and it will always be for the business, right? And you have to make sure you're wearing that hat, right? Is to make sure that's great. You did something very creative and innovative, but they're not going to be able to understand it, right? And being able to make sure you don't lose that focus. Just one more question before we wrap it up. So, we're talking about Snowflake, and we all know Snowflake is going, 100 miles an hour with what they do. Since your book, I think there's been like dynamic tables. There's been, iceberg tables. There's all kinds of new things that are coming out. So is there a second edition in the horizon ahead, or?
Of course. I have no doubt that there will be a second edition. Just for the very same reason you mentioned, that there's just going to be a ton more Snowflake specific features to write about. And besides physical objects that they're releasing, as you saw the other day at Cloud World Tour, there's a lot of focus being made on data governance and data quality.
Yeah,
obviously for good reason. So not having to reinvent the wheel in that department, of having built-in functions and system enforced data quality checks, that's going to be huge. And also, again, everything that Snowflake builds tends to be a lot cheaper to implement natively. So to have the services layer take care of it for you instead of you having to do it using a warehouse yourself, the difference could be literally infinite because it's free. It's built into the system, and it doesn't require a warehouse. And things like this are very relevant, and more so than ever in terms of analytics and what people expect out of the data team, and expect to have that confidence of what you're delivering actually meets the parameters ahead of time that the business expects out of you. So that would be a really interesting angle to try to also take it into a little bit of a new direction into data governance, data quality. And
yeah. And I definitely think there is that tight, I have always considered data modeling as an aspect of data governance in some aspects. I think there is a tight connection between, like you said, the data quality, the data modeling, and all of it coming together. But we're kind of out of time here, Serge. I know you and I could probably just keep on going and talking about stuff, but I really appreciate you joining me today and talking about this. And we will, for everybody, we will kind of put a link to Serge's book in the comments below. Encourage you to take a look at it. And again, thanks for joining me today, Serge.
My pleasure. And thanks for all the great questions. And as soon as we hang up, I'm sure I'll talk to you throughout the day, multiple times, and back to business.
Exactly. Well, again, thanks everybody. And thanks for joining us on our episode of Behind the Cape. And we'll see you all next episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye.